So being a filmmaker in virtual reality is a bit like calling, basically it's like a fancy word for sucker. And it's a bit masochistic, actually, of me to be in it, because it's been crazy. I've been in this for a year. I'm what Google considers their principal filmmaker for VR at Google, so you can imagine it's been a little weird. And I guess the biggest thing is I don't know. Most times, I end up wrong. Most times, I end up thinking that I know, and then it works, and then it doesn't work for another time. And it's been kind of intense. That said, I've been trying to distill all my failures into ways that other people can learn from. Because as a filmmaker, it's actually great to use filmmaking as a framework, but to not think of it as the end goal, the end result. So I'm going to begin with this. Can I move around? Can you hear me? Is this wrong?
Can you give me the mic?
Oh, yeah. So this is a frame. And as a filmmaker, we love the frame. That's everything to us, right? And at Google, for the past, 6 years, it's been what I've been doing, which is making films in frames. And so when I was involved with VR, when I started with VR at Google about a year ago, I went around the world and filmed a bunch of stuff. And what I ended up doing was, when it came down to editing this stuff together, I saw it as this, which is a linear construct, right? It's what I knew. There aren't any books. There aren't any podcasts. There aren't any films about what I could be doing or not doing. And so what I did was I put frames next to frames next to frames. And what I'm going to do is just quickly go through it in 3 different sections. The first, what I want to talk about is world building. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how do I take a linear construct and adapt it to what VR actually wants from me. And the thing about VR is that it's not only turning away from the frame isn't just a thing that happens, it's a thing that's embraced. So the frame isn't actually ever really here for very long. It sometimes, goes there. I will be introducing really interesting Keynote transitions and effects because I feel like they're greatly underutilized. So, so I was wrong. Right? Anyway, so what ended up being was this idea of worlds that begot other worlds, worlds that extended from each other, and really trying to find a way to create a universe. And the reason that this is so great from an editorial standpoint is that I can actually see all the potential, all the possibilities of a space, versus a frame, which is a premeditated box that I just assume someone's going to be seeing. Because if you're watching a film or watching a presentation, you are. And so the second part of this, really, beyond just the world building aspect, is this idea of the person that's actually in the space, the visitor. And for a while, for the past year, I've been calling it the viewer, which is weird, because really, you're just making a world that someone ends up being on, or a planet they land on. So visitor seems a little bit more appropriate. Again, that could change tomorrow. I don't know. And what's really interesting about understanding that someone's actually in the space is that I realized pretty quickly that the question of, how do I get them to look where I want them to look, which is a filmmaker's dilemma in a space like this, was wrong. Because all that needs to happen is for someone to turn away from that, for it to be just completely wrong. So, that one's actually pretty good. I'm really excited about that one. So it's really this. It's the possibility, right? It's what's the potential of experience? And the fact that they have the agency to look anywhere, they can engage with whatever they want, I need to be aware of all that stuff. So how do I even begin to do this, right? And one of the things, there's 2 things I think about. One is the idea of attention, right? Where in a world is someone going to be engaged with? Or what points of attention are going to exist? And so for Glacier, I can kind of make a good guess that someone in a space is going to look at this guy. In a tram, it's a little bit more complicated because life is complicated. So I imagine there's probably more places for someone to look. And with rocks, it's just utter chaos. So, but then you start thinking about engagement. It's not like any of these are wrong, right? It's just that they're different. They all serve a different purpose. They all are constructed differently. And so what is usually just a what becomes a how. What happens when things begin to get, vastly more complex? How do people actually engage in a space? But once you understand that, and these are things that I'm thinking about, granted, I don't have anything figured out, but I imagine that once you actually start to understand what the beginning and ends of an experience might be for someone, or what their general experience is, you can actually start to have a conversation. So I'm like, oh, you're gonna look here? Okay, well, you're gonna look through a window. I'm going to extend that. Now you're in another space. If you look through that way, then I can meet you where you look, and now you're in a different, so it's like this weird tunneling effect. And there's more, but I just did this slide so you can take a break. But there's ideas of discovery, right? Once you understand what engagement could exist, you can actually start to craft around it. So like, okay, you're looking this way, maybe I'll plant something just out of the corner of your eye, so you discover it. Discovery is huge. Engagement with discovery, stories that are discovered, it's vastly more interesting. Rebellion, what happens when you look the other direction? How do we reward that? Do we reward that? How do we engage with something like that? And movement as a narrative layer. Right now, we just think of movement as like, oh, they turn their head to see something. But what if that motion was actually in itself part of the experience, like part of the narrative, right? Like, what's the dance there? And once you really get an understanding of that, and start putting this all together, you start to align things. And suddenly you have a pathway through this thing that you've created. And the last thing I want to talk about is agency. So things that I've been talking about are all kind of leading up to this, and they're important, but agency is the biggest thing. I made a lot of mistakes, like tilting the camera sideways and putting it on my head, as if that was a good idea, and it's pretty good. And bunnies, right? Oh yeah, they're so cute. No. So the one thing that we forget, and the one thing that seems the most important, and I forget this all the time because I'm like, oh, it's a camera, and I know the camera to be a tool, is that it's not just the human at the end of the experience, it's the human the whole way through. It's not just a human at the end that puts on a headset. The camera is a person, which when you look at it, you're like, I guess I can see that, but it's like a brain and eyes and ears. And anything that happens to that camera will happen to a person, will happen to a human being. That's a huge responsibility. And it's not like, it's not like a 3-DOF, 6-DOF conversation. It's not like, well, this is positional and therefore it's better, or this is, experiences when you're standing and looking around aren't good enough. It's mental, right? There are amazing experiences we all have just by not moving, right? A lot of the memories that I have that are really engaging and wonderful, I don't remember doing anything at all. I just remember just experiencing something. And it's a little bit more nebulous. Another thing, too, that I've been thinking a lot about is this idea that, okay, like, that is a literal idea of what something should be, right? Like a girl playing a violin in the room. But what about this? What about looking behind you and seeing, the parents in the door, you hear the music of the girl, and you know she's there. Like the idea of presence, what presence does to, what it does to add to a situation. What's cinematic, I guess, about VR that we're maybe taking too literally right now. Another thing that I have the example here, and we're really excited about it, is this idea of what is real perception? How do we see things really? We see red, and we see a different color red. All of us see a different color red. And you give it to a deep dream, and you see eyes, I guess. So there's something about getting out of our own heads and actually seeing what's really there. And energy. Oh my gosh, we never talk about energy. This idea of this is at Google I/O last year. And you feel highly objectified by these nerds. Because all they care about is the tech. They don't really, they're not like, oh, look at the human. They're like, oh, look at the new camera. And it feels very odd. I encourage men to try it. But here, but this is an example. These are the engineers that built the camera in Seattle. And it's same types of folks, I guess, I don't know. But it is so much more engaging. You feel loved, you feel appreciated. And it's just different. It's totally different. And there's an energy. There's an energy to the room now. There's an energy, when you go see your family. There's an energy when you go to a place that you don't know. There's definitely an energy when you're in front of a bunch of people trying to talk. And the thing is, cinema has done really well with that because it understands itself as a medium. It knew how to harness the stuff that makes energy palpable, tells these stories about love and joy and sadness because it understands itself. And VR is not there yet. We are just beginning to even understand how to make the stuff, let alone understand how to translate a lot of the more complicated stuff like consciousness and energy and things like that. I forget why I put this up here, but it's kind of cool. Yeah, this is what I really want to talk about. If you think of, so for me, sorry, I'm like going on really long, but if you think about film as a condensed atom of story, of character, of a world that you do not know or understand, but it's in this little atom, and you imagine that atom exploding, that's VR. The story, the consciousness, the light, the color, everything is all around you, and it's very nebulous. And so the question filmmakers should be asking, anyone that's asking in VR should be asking is how do you craft that universe? And so my work is basically trying to figure that out. So with that, thank you very much.